The cowboy would later swear that the moment he fell in love began with blood in the mud and thunder splitting the sky above a dying horse. Long before he touched her hand or learned the secrets hidden behind her guarded eyes, he watched her kneel in the freezing rain beside the only creature he had left in the world and fight for its life, as if losing it would break her too. In that instant, standing helpless beneath the storm with water streaming down his face and fear clawing at his chest, Wyatt Mercer realized something impossible was happening. The woman who rode out of the darkness that night was about to change everything. Rain hammered the plains like falling bullets as Wyatt forced Ghost forward across the muddy trail leading toward Black Creek Ridge. The black stallion's breathing had grown uneven miles ago, foam gathering at its mouth, while lightning flashed over the endless Montana frontier. Wyatt leaned low in the saddle, jaw clenched tight beneath the brim of his soaked hat. "Just a little farther, boy," he muttered hoarsely, patting the horse's neck. Ghost stumbled suddenly, nearly throwing him. Wyatt's heart lurched. The horse had carried him through cattle wars, blizzards, and gunfights over the last 10 years. There had been nights when that animal was the only living thing standing beside him beneath cold stars. Another crack of thunder exploded overhead. Then Ghost collapsed completely. The stallion crashed into the mud with a violent groan, legs buckling beneath him. Wyatt hit the ground hard beside him, instantly dropping to his knees. "Ghost!" Panic ripped through his voice. Rain poured down his back while the horse struggled weakly, sides heaving. Wyatt quickly spotted the swelling near the animal's lower leg. Snakebite. The wound had turned dark beneath soaked black fur, poison spreading fast through the exhausted horse's body. "Damn it," Wyatt growled, ripping off his gloves and pressing his trembling hands against the wound as though he could force death back with sheer stubbornness. But Ghost only shivered harder. For the first time in years, fear overtook him completely. Not fear of dying, not fear of outlaws or storms or loneliness. Fear of losing the last thing he loved. The rain intensified, drumming against the earth while Wyatt looked around desperately at the empty plains. There was no town nearby, no ranch, no doctor. Nothing except darkness stretching endlessly beneath lightning-filled clouds. Then suddenly another sound reached him through the storm. Hoofbeats. Wyatt spun instantly, revolver drawn in one smooth motion. Out of the rain emerged a rider cloaked in a long oilskin coat atop a chestnut mare. The figure dismounted before he could warn them away. A woman stepped into the lightning glow, rain sliding down strands of chestnut hair plastered against her face. She carried saddlebags filled with bottles, cloth, and instruments hanging from worn leather straps. Her eyes landed immediately on Ghost struggling in the mud. "Move," she ordered calmly. Wyatt narrowed his eyes dangerously. "Take one more step and your horse is dying," she snapped sharply, kneeling beside Ghost without waiting for permission. "You can threaten me after I save him." Wyatt froze in disbelief. Nobody spoke to him that way. Not anymore. Not after the reputation he'd earned across Montana territory. Yet this woman ignored both his gun and his glare as though neither mattered. Lightning flashed overhead while she pressed careful hands against the swollen wound. "Rattler bite," she muttered. "And he's been ridden too hard after it happened." Wyatt's jaw tightened defensively. "I didn't know." She glanced up briefly. "I softer now." "I know." Her voice carried no accusation, only urgency. "Hold his head steady." Something in the calm authority of her tone made Wyatt obey before pride could stop him. He knelt beside Ghost, cradling the horse's head while rain soaked through his coat. The woman worked quickly, cutting the wound open, slightly with a small knife before pouring whiskey over it. Ghost jerked violently. Wyatt cursed under his breath. "Easy, boy." The woman removed a vial from her back. "This might keep the poison from reaching his heart if we're lucky." Wyatt stared at her hands moving steadily despite thunder shaking the earth around them. She wasn't frightened, wasn't hesitant. Most people looked at Wyatt Mercer with caution or fear, whispering stories about the widowed rancher who preferred isolation over company and violence over conversation. But this woman treated him like none of that mattered. Her focus remained entirely on saving Ghost. Rainwater dripped from her chin as she leaned closer to the horse, whispering softly to calm him. Wyatt watched every movement she made, something strange tightening painfully inside his chest. "Come on, sweetheart," she murmured gently to the stallion. "You're too stubborn to die tonight." Wyatt swallowed hard. Nobody had spoken with kindness around him in a very long time. Minutes passed like hours while the storm raged around them. Finally, Ghost's violent trembling began to ease slightly. The horse exhaled heavily, eyes no longer wild with panic. The woman sat back slowly in the mud, breathing hard. "He's not safe yet," she said quietly. "But he's got a chance now." Wyatt stared at Ghost in stunned silence before looking toward her again. Water streamed down both of them, while thunder rolled low across the plains. "Why'd you stop?" he asked roughly. "Most people wouldn't." She wiped rain from her face. "Most people know who you are." Wyatt's expression darkened slightly. "And you don't care?" Her lips curved faintly despite exhaustion. "I care about dying horses more." For the first time in years, Wyatt almost smiled. Almost. The storm softened slightly around them, while Ghost rested weakly in the mud. Wyatt finally holstered his revolver and offered her his hand. She hesitated only briefly before taking it. The moment her fingers touched his, warmth spread unexpectedly through his chest despite the freezing rain. He pulled her carefully to her feet. Up close, he noticed how tired she looked beneath her fierce composure, how determination still burned behind eyes shadowed by grief she clearly carried alone. "Name's Wyatt Mercer," he said quietly. She studied him for a long moment before answering. "Clara Bennett." Lightning illuminated the plains behind her, while winds swept through the tall grass. Wyatt couldn't explain why his heartbeat suddenly felt different standing there beside her. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was relief over Ghost surviving. Or maybe it was the simple fact that for the first time in years, someone had ridden into his lonely world carrying life instead of fear. Clara glanced toward the dark horizon. "There's an abandoned line shack a mile east," she said softly. "Your horse won't survive the night out here." Wyatt looked down at Ghost, then back at her. Every instinct built from years of solitude warned him not to trust strangers. Yet watching Clara stand there soaked by rain after saving the creature he loved most, he realized something dangerous had already begun inside him. Because somewhere between the thunder and the mud and the sound of her steady voice calming his dying horse, the cowboy had fallen for her completely. Wyatt Mercer spent the entire ride to the abandoned line shack trying to convince himself the storm was the reason his pulse still felt unsteady. But deep down he knew the truth had nothing to do with thunder rolling across the Montana plains and everything to do with the woman riding beside him through the rain. Clara Bennett guided her chestnut mare slowly while Wyatt led Ghost carefully through the mud, refusing to let the wounded stallion strain himself further. The storm clouds hung low overhead, turning the endless prairie into a world of darkness broken only by flashes of lightning. Every few minutes Wyatt glanced toward Clara without meaning to. Rain soaked through her coat and strands of wet hair clung to her cheeks, yet she rode with calm confidence, as though she belonged to the storm itself. He had met women before, plenty of them during his years drifting between cattle towns and ranches, but none had ever unsettled him this way. Most people either feared him or tried too hard to impress him. Clara did neither. She simply rode beside him in silence after saving the only thing he loved, as if risking herself for strangers was an ordinary part of her life. The old line shack finally appeared through the darkness near a cluster of cottonwood trees bending violently in the wind. The small cabin leaned slightly with age, its roof battered by years of storms, but it offered enough shelter to keep Ghost alive through the night. Wyatt quickly pushed open the crooked door, while Clara helped guide the trembling horse inside the attached stable area. Ghost nearly collapsed again once they got him under cover. Clara immediately dropped beside him, checking the wound carefully while Wyatt lit an oil lantern hanging from a rusted nail. Warm golden light flickered across the small shack, chasing shadows across rough wooden walls. "The swelling's slowing," Clara said softly after a moment. "That's good." Wyatt exhaled a breath he felt like he had been holding for hours. "You really think he'll make it?" Clara glanced up at him, her expression gentler now. "I wouldn't have fought this hard if I didn't." Something about the certainty in her voice eased the tightness crushing Wyatt's chest. He removed his soaked hat slowly, running a tired hand through damp dark hair streaked faintly with gray at the temples. Clara noticed immediately. "You look exhausted," she murmured. Wyatt gave a short dry laugh. "Been riding since sunrise." "Why push a wounded horse through a storm?" she asked quietly while cleaning mud from Ghost's leg. Wyatt hesitated. Most people in town already knew pieces of his story. the lonely rancher, the gunfighter turned cattleman, the widower who preferred silence over company. But somehow speaking about himself to Clara felt different. Harder. Didn't know he was bitten till too late, he admitted roughly. Ghost never complains. Just keeps moving. Clara nodded softly as though she understood more than he said aloud. Some creatures do that, she whispered. The words lingered heavily between them. Outside, rain hammered the roof while wind rattled the cabin walls. Wyatt busied himself building a fire in the small stone fireplace near the corner, though he could still feel Clara's presence behind him like warmth spreading through frozen ground. Soon flames crackled softly, filling the shack with orange light and the scent of smoke and rain-soaked wood. Clara removed her coat carefully, revealing a faded blue shirt rolled at the sleeves and a leather holster strapped at her waist. Wyatt's eyes narrowed slightly. Veterinarians usually carry pistols now. Clara caught the glance and smirked faintly. Traveling alone through outlaw country teaches a woman useful habits. Wyatt almost smiled again. You always answer questions without answering them. Only when strangers ask. He leaned back against the wall, studying her carefully. You saved my horse. Feels like we're past strangers. Clara paused briefly while wringing rainwater from her hair. For the first time since meeting her, uncertainty flickered across her face. Maybe, she said quietly. Ghost shifted weakly nearby, drawing her attention again. She moved beside the stallion and rested a gentle hand against his neck. Wyatt watched the tenderness in her movements, the patience in her eyes, and something deep inside him twisted painfully. He remembered another woman once looking at him with that kind of warmth years ago before violence and loss hollowed him out. He quickly shoved the memory away. Clara suddenly looked toward a scar running along Wyatt's forearm exposed beneath his rolled sleeve. Bullet wound, she asked softly. Wyatt glanced down briefly. 2 years ago. You were lucky. No, he replied quietly. Just hard to kill. Clara held his gaze for a long moment beneath flickering firelight. Those aren't always the same thing. Silence settled heavily between them again, but this time it felt less uncomfortable. More dangerous somehow. The storm outside softened slightly, while warmth slowly filled the shack. Wyatt finally removed a small coffee tin from his saddlebag and began boiling water over the fire. Coffee's terrible, he warned. Clara sat on an old wooden crate nearby, exhaustion finally creeping into her posture. If it's hot, I'll survive. Wyatt handed her a steaming cup moments later, their fingers brushing briefly again. The contact sent another strange jolt through him. Clara seemed to feel it too because her eyes lifted immediately toward his before quickly looking away. Wyatt sat across from her, studying the flames while Ghost slept quietly nearby. So what brings you out here alone? He asked after a while. Clara stared down into her coffee cup for several seconds before answering. Passing through. Wyatt raised an eyebrow slightly. That's not much of an answer. It's the one I'm giving. You should have dropped the subject. Any sensible man would have. But Clara Bennett had ridden out of a storm and somehow walked straight through walls Wyatt spent 10 years building around himself. He found he wanted to know everything about her. You always this stubborn? He asked. A faint smile touched her lips. You always this nosy? Wyatt chuckled quietly before he could stop himself. The sound surprised both of them. Clara looked genuinely shocked hearing laughter come from him at all. Wyatt noticed and shook his head slightly. Don't get used to it. Too late, she replied softly. Thunder rumbled low in the distance while firelight danced across her face. For a moment neither of them spoke. The air between them seemed to tighten with something neither fully understood yet. Then suddenly Ghost struggled weakly again, breathing harder. Clara instantly moved beside the horse while Wyatt dropped to one knee opposite her. Their shoulders brushed as they worked together to calm him. Easy, boy, Wyatt murmured, stroking the stallion's mane. Clara pressed careful fingers against Ghost's neck, checking his pulse. Fever's rising again, she whispered. Concern darkened Wyatt's face immediately. What do we do? Clara looked toward the medical bag near the door. I need another vial. Wyatt grabbed it quickly, kneeling beside her again while lightning flashed through cracks in the wooden walls. Together they fought through the next hour to keep Ghost alive. Sweat mixed with rainwater on Clara's skin despite the cold. Wyatt watched her tirelessly care for the horse without complaint or hesitation and realized something terrifying was happening to him. Every time she touched Ghost gently or spoke calmly through exhaustion, another piece of the loneliness inside him cracked open. Near midnight, Ghost finally settled, breathing easier once more. Clara sagged back against the wall beside him, visibly drained. Wyatt stared at her across the dim stable light, emotions twisting painfully in his chest. "You didn't have to stay," he said quietly. Clara looked toward the sleeping horse and then back at Wyatt. "Yes," she whispered. "I did." Outside, the storm continued rolling across the frontier, but inside the little lion shack something had shifted forever between the cowboy and the woman who saved his dying horse in the rain. Morning arrived slowly across the Montana plains, pale sunlight breaking through the last remnants of the storm, while mist rolled over the soaked grasslands surrounding the old lion shack. Wyatt Mercer woke before dawn out of habit, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver beside him before memory settled back into place. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving only faint embers glowing inside the stone fireplace. For a moment, he simply listened to the quiet. No thunder, no rain, only the distant cry of meadowlarks and the soft sound of horses shifting in the stable. Then he noticed Clara Bennett asleep against the wall beside Ghost. She had apparently refused to leave the stallion's side, even after exhaustion overtook her sometime before sunrise. Her medical bag rested beside her boots, one hand still lightly touching Ghost's neck as though even in sleep she remained determined to keep him alive. Wyatt found himself staring longer than he should have. Morning light slipped through the wooden cracks in the shack walls, illuminating strands of chestnut hair falling across her face. She looked different asleep, softer, younger somehow beneath the fierce independence she carried like armor. Wyatt quickly looked away, irritated with himself. Men like him did not stand around admiring women in quiet moments. He had learned years ago that attachment only led to graves and loneliness. Yet no matter how many times he reminded himself of that truth, something about Clara kept pulling him back toward feelings he buried long ago. Ghost stirred suddenly, lifting his head weakly. Clara woke instantly. "Easy there," she whispered, immediately checking the horse's wound. Wyatt stepped closer. "How's he look?" Clara examined the swelling carefully before finally exhaling in relief. "Better." A faint smile touched her lips. "I think he's gonna make it." Wyatt closed his eyes briefly at the words. Relief hit him harder than expected. He rested a rough hand against Ghost's neck, emotion tightening painfully in his chest. "Hear that, boy?" he muttered quietly. "Too stubborn to die." Clara smiled watching him. Wyatt noticed the expression and straightened slightly. "What?" "Nothing," she replied softly. "Just didn't expect a man like Wyatt Mercer to talk so sweet to a horse." He snorted lightly. "Horse earned it." Clara stood slowly, stretching stiff muscles after the long night. Wyatt handed her a tin cup of coffee he had warmed over the fire. Their fingers brushed again, and once more that strange heat spread through him despite the cold morning air. Clara seemed aware of it too because she looked away first, sipping carefully from the cup. Outside, clouds drifted apart revealing endless green plains still glittering with rainwater beneath the rising sun. Wyatt stepped outside briefly to inspect the area while Clara packed her supplies. The storm had left deep mud across the trail and swollen creeks throughout the valley. Traveling would be slow today. Wyatt leaned against the porch rail, studying the horizon thoughtfully. He should have left hours ago. His ranch sat nearly 20 miles west, and there were fences needing repair after the storm. But instead of saddling up, he found himself listening for Clara's footsteps behind him. She finally stepped outside carrying her coat over one arm. "Looks like the world survived after all," she said softly. Wyatt glanced sideways at her. "Barely." Wind swept gently through the plains, lifting strands of her hair while silence settled comfortably between them. Then Clara looked toward Ghost grazing weakly near the stable fence. "He'll need another day before hard riding," she said. "If you push him too fast now, the poison could spread again." Wyatt nodded once. "Then we stay?" The words left his mouth before he fully thought them through. Clara looked slightly surprised. "You sure?" Wyatt met her eyes steadily. "Ain't leaving him." What he did not say aloud was that part of him suddenly did. "Not want to leave her either." Clara seemed to sense the unspoken truth lingering there because her expression softened slightly before she looked away again. They spent the morning repairing part of the stable roof damaged during the storm. Wyatt worked overhead while Clara organized supplies below, occasionally handing him tools while teasing him about his terrible hammering skills. To his own surprise, Wyatt found himself answering back. By midday, laughter quietly existed between them where silence had ruled the night before. It felt strange, dangerous even, yet somehow right. After finishing repairs, Wyatt saddled his horse carefully while Clara prepared her mare near the water trough. "So where exactly are you headed?" Wyatt finally asked. Clara hesitated briefly. "Black Hollow." The name immediately darkened Wyatt's expression. "That town's trouble." "I know. Then why go?" Clara tightened the strap on her saddle before answering quietly. "Someone there owes me answers." Wyatt studied her closely. There was pain hidden beneath her calm voice now. Old pain. The kind he recognized too well. "Family?" he asked softly. Clara paused. "My husband." The word hit Wyatt harder than expected. Something sharp twisted unexpectedly inside his chest. Clara noticed immediately. "He died 3 years ago," she continued gently. "Railroad attack outside Black Hollow." Wyatt looked away toward the plains. "Sorry." Clara nodded once though sadness lingered in her eyes. "I spent a long time running afterward," she admitted quietly. "Helping sick animals. Moving town to town. Easier than staying still long enough to remember things." Wyatt understood that feeling better than anyone. "Still running?" he asked. Clara looked directly at him then. "Maybe." Their eyes held for several seconds before distant hoofbeats suddenly shattered the quiet. Wyatt's entire posture changed instantly. One hand dropped toward his revolver while his gaze snapped toward the eastern ridge. 3 riders appeared through the morning fog moving hard toward the shack. Clara noticed the shift in Wyatt immediately. "Friends?" she asked carefully. Wyatt's voice turned cold again. "No." The riders approached fast, rifles visible across their saddles. "Outlaws." Wyatt recognized them almost instantly. Men connected to the Grayson gang operating near Black Hollow. Trouble he thought he left behind months ago. The lead rider spotted Wyatt and grinned cruelly. "Well, I'll be damned," the man shouted. "Mercer's still breathing." Clara stepped back slightly, sensing danger immediately. Wyatt moved subtly in front of her without thinking. The outlaw's eyes shifted toward Clara, then toward Ghost nearby. "Heard your horse finally dropped," the rider sneered. "Looks like rumors travel faster than death." Wyatt's expression hardened dangerously. "State your business." The outlaw shrugged lazily. "Boss heard Mercer might still owe him money from old days. Thought we'd collect." Wyatt's hand hovered inches from his revolver now. Clara noticed his jaw tightening and whispered quietly beside him, "Wyatt." But the cowboy barely heard her. Years of violence threatened to rise back to the surface. The lead outlaw suddenly looked toward Clara again, smiling in a way that made Wyatt's blood run cold. Didn't know the lonely cowboy found himself company. Before the man finished speaking, Wyatt's revolver was already drawn. The movement happened so fast Clara barely saw it. Silence crashed over the plains instantly. Wyatt stood perfectly still, gun aimed directly between the outlaw's eyes. Gone was the quiet rancher from the night before. In his place stood the dangerous man frontier towns whispered about in saloons after midnight. "You got 3 seconds," Wyatt said coldly. "Then you ride away or get buried here." The tension became suffocating. Clara stared at Wyatt in stunned silence, realizing for the first time just how deadly he truly was. Wind swept across the plains while Ghost shifted nervously nearby. Finally, the outlaw laughed nervously and raised both hands slightly. "Easy, Mercer." He signaled the others backward. "Ain't worth dying over." Wyatt never lowered the revolver while they turned their horses around and disappeared into the fog. Only when they vanished completely did he slowly holster the weapon again. Clara remained silent beside him for several seconds. "You didn't tell me men were hunting you," she said quietly. Wyatt kept his eyes on the distant horizon. "You didn't tell me why Black Hollow matters." The words hung heavily between them. Then Clara surprised him by stepping closer instead of away. "Looks like we both got Ghost chasing us," she whispered softly. Wyatt finally looked down at her. Standing there beneath clearing skies with danger closing around them from every direction, he realized something undeniable. The storm that brought Clara Bennett into his life had been only the beginning.